Hey, John Gilroy here. Today, we are going to look at the backbone of the federal government, procurement. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is Reid Jackson. He's the CEO of a company called Unison, Unison. Reid, how are you?
John, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Boy, procurement, January, February 2025. You're walking into a hurricane here, aren't you? Wow, all kinds of adventures.
Yeah, this is our sweet spot. So, when you want to know where the money is being spent on what contracts, that's where we come in.
Good. So let's maybe drop back here and not get all caught up in, the storm taking place right now, and maybe pull back to 40,000 feet and see in general what your company does. Now, the way I understand it, you work with acquisition management, cost engineering, something called virtual acquisition, and project management. And I think what you do is you act as the adult in the room. Is that what we can call it?
Yeah, we are really the company that just is the back office side of government. It's all the business side of actually driving whatever that government agency is trying to achieve, whatever their missions are. There's a lot of things that have to go right that are kind of behind the scenes. It's getting things on contract, it's getting clear on your budget and the forecasting of how that money is going to be spent. It's kind of the unglamorous side of achieving these missions, but when it goes well and it goes smoothly, it just disappears nicely into the background. But when it is not going smoothly, it can really mess up and gum up the works. So, at Unison, we just try to make it all operate invisibly so that the agencies can just do what they're trying to do.
Okay, the analogy, I'm looking at you thinking of Marshawn Lattimore, and he was a cornerback for the Commanders, and the first game he played, they never mentioned his name. They said, that's a good thing. That's a good thing when nothing goes wrong.
Right.
Huh? Good.
Quite right.
I've been going to federal websites, and some are there, some aren't. And I went to one this morning called the GAO. And I figured, that's what's going on in the GAO. And I have a press release from January 23rd, which is a couple weeks back. And GOE calls for urgent action to address IT acquisition and management challenges. That's tossed right to you, doesn't it?
That's our sweet spot. We really, from a provider perspective, we're there to give these agencies just visibility into how are the contracts performing, how are the contractors doing, where are we having successes, and where are things on schedule, but also where are things sort of ballooning way out of shape from what was originally expected. You can't get that visibility if you don't have the data in the system and you don't have that tied to what's going on with your financials.
Yeah. And the 3 points that they hone in on here is strengthening oversight, implementing a mature acquisition practice, and then building capacity, which all seems pretty practical, can be applied to commercial organizations, can be applied to professional football teams, applied to many different applications here. So let's go this first one, strengthen oversight. Where do you fit in there, and how does it fit in this dynamic environment where things are changing rapidly? Artificial intelligence is coming in, and there's people that aren't trained in even understanding how to purchase artificial intelligence. So where do you fit in that regard?
The key of oversight starts with the requirement of visibility. Can I just see where things are? Can I see what I have under contract and really see how these programs are performing? So we fit in as the system of record. So this is where Unison is where all of the activities around programs and acquisitions and grants resides for an agency that uses Unison. So when you are looking for oversight, you can use our existing tools like Program Management Review, which is designed to give agency administrators just a lens into show me everything going on with this program, all of the contractors, all of the employees, all of the budget line items. We package that up and create it in a nice lens and dashboard for people to start the inquiry of how's it going, where's it going great, where does it need some attention. That's a core part of using a modern software as a service infrastructure to actually deal with the business side of your agency.
Seems neat and tidy. If we were in a classroom and a whiteboard, we could draw a little box and say this is how it works. But when you apply this little box to the intelligence community, things get more interesting and who gets access to what. And in the military, Talk about ball of confusion, things changing all the time. And so how do you handle those types of organizations where some of the information may be much more secretive?
Yeah, well, the nature of supporting federal agencies, and we are used by the intelligence agencies that have modernized their tech, rely on us for this back office function of contracts and grants. Now, we grew up in this space, so we have the software hardened and secure. It operates on the high side networks as well as it does on the low side networks of your typical civilian agency. So for us, being native to this federal space means that we can operate in all of the domains.
So I did an interview a couple weeks back, and I flashed back from 50 years ago on Mad Magazine and Spy versus Spy, and we played around with that, and it was pretty funny. And I think of artificial intelligence saying, well, there are companies now that are using artificial intelligence to produce proposals, many proposals, and let's face it, some are bad. And so what I see Spy versus the other Spy is that the federal government may be using artificial intelligence to filter those. So where does AI fit in the whole acquisition technology process?
It is changing very rapidly. We looked at AI. One of the things that we do with AI is we really ensure compliance, right? Because if you're spending, granting, moving federal taxpayer dollars, there is a very high standard of care associated with that, a very high requirement for transparency and auditability. And so when we apply generative AI, we're looking to make sure that it's completely reliable. Hallucinations are the things that people fear when you ask generative AI a question. Do you get something that is just factually wrong? That doesn't work if you're in a compliance-oriented mode. You can't be sort of 90% compliant. You need to be 100% compliant. And you're dealing in a federal compliant process like acquisition, the standard for acceptance is 100%. We can't have 90% compliant. And so when we look at deploying generative AI in Unison, we are doing it in a hallucination-free way that is tied directly to the regulations, the case law coming out of GAO, and presenting that in a way that the user can be 100% confident that the answers are correct. We do use it to help agencies ingest this high volume of proposals they're getting and run automated compliance checks. We can help the agencies actually evaluate which proposals are better than others, but there's a careful line to walk there because it is inherently governmental to evaluate proposals and score them, but we can give them a starting point from which they can go on and do their assessment.
That's good. My wife was a high school principal for many years, and she's sure seen a lot of immature behavior with teenagers. You know that. And so I love the word mature. I talk about the software maturity cycle, and now we talk about the contract lifecycle management, the maturity cycle. In fact, what the GAO report talks about is mature acquisition practices. So are these obvious? Does everyone know them? Is it something that Reid Jackson has a little book in the back of his desk? So what is an indication of mature acquisition practice?
Well, acquisition is a very broad term, and it is different than how the commercial world thinks about it. Acquisition is really how the government gets most of their missions done, right? They are defining what does it mean to field this weapon system or deploy this capability to meet the mission. And acquisition means everything from, what does this mean broadly? What are the requirements? What sorts of support do we need from contractors? And all the way through to these sort of minor contract lifecycle management capabilities of sourcing, running a solicitation, making a contract award. When I think about mature acquisition processes, I really think about the enterprise. Are we clear in XYZ agency about what it means to achieve this mission? We've got an appropriation, we've got an allocation of the budget, but have we wrestled with a clear definition of what we're trying to achieve, the milestones, how we're going to hold our contractor partners accountable, how are we going to make sure that we're in line with what the administration and the agency is trying to do now? So when I think about mature acquisition practices, I think about it very broadly. It has an impact on contract lifecycle management and your solicitations, but really it's getting everything up front in place so that your solicitations can go smoothly, so you can find the right industry partners, bring them on board. That's the sort of downstream side of having a really good acquisition set of practices.
I went to your website and I wrote down a phrase called cost engineering. And I think that could be 10 people, 10 different. I have a daughter with a master's degree in finance. Her definition of cost engineering may be slightly different for yours. So when it pertains to the federal government, is cost engineering meaning assigning the appropriate amount of dollars per year, per project? Or what does that mean in the federal government?
Well, it's really the hard work done by the engineers to say, hey, we're going to field a brand new capability. How much is this brand new capability going to cost? Maybe it's a new weapon system. Is this a $500 million weapon system, 600 million, 1.3 billion? How do you get reliable, dependable estimates on something that you've never done before? And so Unison has a set of proprietary data models and data sets in the space of artificial intelligence that can actually help a cost engineer, which is a real role inside of the federal government agencies, build a reliable model. We also do help the aerospace and defense companies who are going to deliver those capabilities, frankly, do the same math and understand how do I think about this capability? How much am I going to need to invest? How do I bid a compelling dollar figure that will be within the budget of the agency? So it's one of those business areas of government that we talked about. Gee, when it goes well, no one thinks about it. When it goes wrong, you've got your F-35 problem. You remember the F-35 was named the F-35 because each plane was going to cost $35 million. In the end, nowhere near that, right? That cost estimate was very far off.
Yeah. There's a phrase in the industry called virtual acquisition. What does that mean?
Our virtual acquisition office is really the softer side of acquisition. How do we keep the workforce, the people who are building the solicitations, trying to drive those mature acquisition practices? How do you get them knowledge of what's new in the industry? What's exciting? What are some of the new techniques and tools? What has perhaps one agency done really well that you could leverage and have the benefit of? And so the virtual acquisition office is a workforce development capability. It's designed to just build the intellectual capital. There's always fewer and fewer dollars for training. Definitely, the cost to go physically to conferences can be prohibitive. So the virtual acquisition office is that sort of desire to, you got to keep people trained, you got to keep them moving forward intellectually. How do you do that in a super cost efficient way that actually meets their continuous learning point requirements? So that's the core of virtual acquisition office: expertise, training, make the workforce more effective so that your mature acquisition practices come through.
When you think about training and continuous education, I think of the NCMA. And I think you participating in the upcoming NCMA event. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll be at the Nexus event in Long Beach, California, on February 9th through 12th. And in addition, we'll be at the Boston chapter meeting March 13th. So, come and visit us there. It'd be great to have you.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll put links to those events in the show notes. So you can go to federaltechpodcast.com and episode 215 and then get links to there and find out. And it's a nice way to go face to face. But in this world, I just think acquisition training, procurement training, that may be half the conference because there's so much. How can you keep up? No one can keep up. I was talking about artificial intelligence, and I said there's something new every 6 months, and someone told me, no, every 6 weeks. So, Reid, how do you keep up?
This is where we live. This is Unison's only business is driving sort of the practical side of innovation into government operations. So there is a lot going on. There's a lot of generative AI and robotic process automation, the data science around this. And Unison, our team of professionals is devoted to taking all of these new capabilities and just finding pragmatic ways to make the missions of government run more smoothly, right? How does that contracts professional have more time to do the hard thinking about the acquisition practices, about collaborating with those program offices and finding the right vendors. Well, we do that by trying to take a lot of the compliance side and the drudgery of the job completely off their hands with artificial intelligence and robotic process automation, machine learning, and the data science side of it. It is a never-ending task. It's always moving forward. It's moving forward now faster than it's ever moved forward.
When I do interviews on zero trust, my experts usually say, well, you get 20 agencies, 20 different levels of understanding of zero trust and implementation of zero trust. I would think that in the federal government, you can get 10 agencies, 20 agencies, and they'll have different experiences and challenges in implementing acquisition tech. And I'm sure there's civilian agencies may have different challenges than the military, and all kinds of different implementations come in. And so what are the big hurdles that they encounter?
Well, implementing acquisition tech is the same as implementing any major enterprise software system, and that starts with what path do you choose to go down, right? And there is still, unfortunately, in government, a really big threat of people who choose to go down a path of custom building special software.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen anymore in the commercial space. That's sort of been retired a long time ago. But in government, there's still folks that really believe that the right answer is for government to build software, even if it's readily available from the commercial market. So the people who have very quick implementations, who have their data in one place, that have their systems interconnected so they're talking to each other, they tend to go down a path of just using what is commercially available. That's a Unison path. If you want to spend 10 times as long and 100 times as much money, there's another path, which is building it yourself. But that really does end up being a little bit of an empty promise, where now an agency basically finds themselves in the software business owning every challenge. And we talked about how fast the technical world is changing, and now all of the homegrown systems, they have to sort out individually how they are going to use generative AI, how they're going to use things like robotic process automation. They're going to have to sort out why you don't use blockchain in a federal environment very much. And that's just, that's really a recipe for a lot of money and a lot of time to end up behind what's already available. And there's been decades of messages that encourage agencies to use commercially available systems for exactly these reasons. You have secure, accessible, modern systems available, but there's still, sort of some sort of human tendency to want to control it and own it, and that brings a whole different class of problems.
If I have a problem with my car, my mechanic has very sophisticated diagnostic tools. Yeah. They can plug in, and I don't know if you've ever seen one of those reports. They'll bore you to tears. They can tell you everything that's going on. Now, that may make a parallel with an agency. I mean, can they even afford the diagnostic tools? Well, my mechanic does 100 cars a day, so he can afford it, but it just seems like that the whole bespoke solution might have worked 20, 25 years ago, but there were constant failures even then. And I think it's time to maybe open your eyes and say, well, look, it's time to maybe use someone else's tools on certain aspects of even diagnostics.
Yeah, and there's just a lot, there are a lot of incentives in the federal space that don't exist inside commercial companies. Commercial companies just never would take this approach. They don't have the money. They operate in a scarcity environment. And here in the federal agencies, really, sometimes it's a matter of, can I secure all that money, and how does that sort of benefit my career? Not, is it the most efficient thing to do? And as I say, you're sort of, when you're building a custom system, kind of regardless of what platform you're building it on, you're getting further behind every day. Even if you're making great progress and you're feeling like I've, implemented another 20 people today, well, the technology you've implemented them on, as you say, like, it's not every 6 months, it's every 6 weeks. You're now actually further behind what's available in the market with the built-in diagnostic capability, the 100% data visibility. It is a little bit of a shame. People come to Unison to sort of break that habit, right? So when they hit rock bottom, as they were, and what they say about addicts, when they hit rock bottom, that's when you decide to get clean. And if you want to get clean, you come to Unison for that.
Unison for this 12-step program for bespoke systems. I and sit around in a circle and to complain about it. Yeah.
How to break your cycle of abuse with your custom built system.
Yeah. Capacity is something that's awful easy to see in the rearview mirror, but never able to see over the horizon. And so how do you design a system, an acquisition system, to handle this kind of changes in capacity?
We grew up in this space. Unison has always been solely focused on the federal ecosystem. That's the government contractors and the agencies. And so, part of growing up only serving this space is you natively speak all of the strange aspects of this population. That's security, that's a zero, which includes a zero trust you talk about, and it's the regulations that are constantly evolving and being added to, but it is also scale, right? So we run the largest contracts in some, I think I would say, in the world, right? Like these federal agencies will put out multiple award schedules that have thousands of contractors, tens of thousands of line items that exist for 20 years with thousands upon thousands of modifications. You can only do that on an enterprise architecture that was built for that from the ground up, which is another challenge that people who go with, custom built systems or things built on, low code or BPM platforms find. It's just, they're not designed for the crushing scale of a federal agency that is transacting tens or hundreds of billions of dollars in contract actions a year.
Yeah. It's the scale thing is just, I think it's, I think people from, I don't know, if I fly into Utah or Oklahoma and the scale is just, it's unbelievable. If you took like satellites in space, the number of satellites between now and 2030 is going to be 30,000 new satellites. Well, first of all, what about the acquisition process for each one of those satellites? That's just the start of the cycle, because they got to come up, they got to come down, they got to be maintained. And I think when we started talking about contract lifecycle management, most people don't think what's going to happen in 5 years and think, we're going to transition out. People don't think about that at all, and I think that can set them up for so many troubles.
Yeah, the tail on every contract goes for decades. How do you maintain visibility and transparency as that program just continues to evolve and change, and just being able to look back and say, what were we doing 5 years ago? How much were we spending? How has that changed? Like, where has it gone off the rails? Where's there an opportunity to get it back on the rails? And that's the promise of having real transparency into the business side of these missions, right? It's not just clarity on what are we trying to accomplish, which is a really big part of this acquisition best practices, but it's then like, okay, in the weeds, can I see it? Do I have the data? Is the data connected 10 to 20 years of a set of contracts? So, that's what Unison wants to bring. We want to bring that degree of long-term transparency and data that you can act on to make better decisions.
Yeah, it's a very complicated process. And I think we can pick up the proverbial newspaper and see headlines, but sometimes that's smoke and there's a lot of activity going on in the background. And we're not even going to go there. We're going to talk about, in general, project management in the federal government. Well, great. Any words of wisdom for our listeners here to weather the way through tough, stormy seas here?
Well, I think this is a time when we all really just want to focus on the mission side of the government agencies. These missions are important to us as a society, right? These are things we've chosen to fund and put our scarce resources against. We want those missions to go off without a hitch. We want to be invisible in the background because it all works and it all works smoothly.
Yeah, that's a nice even-keeled way to respond to all this stress and turmoil here. Great. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Reid Jackson, CEO of Unison. Thanks, Reid.